This is an extract from my book, Up the Bumpy Lane. During my formative years I was in hospital several times, and this is an account of one of my visits to hospital. That bumpy lane had a few more bumps yet. It just started with feeling generally unwell, then a couple of days off work. By now I was working as an unqualified teacher at the Crescent School. This was shortly followed by my pee becoming the colour of a cardinal's cassock. Within hours this had all escalated into a ghastly reprise of the health disasters of my early childhood. Our faithful old physician, Dr. Coulter, drove up from Westbury in his cranking car. Now, 10 or so years older than when he first packed me off for my extended stay as a guest of the then newly created National Health Service, the kindly old boy was now at my bedside in my tiny little tin prefab bedroom. Still with his trademark blocked and snorting nose, heavy overcoat and Homburg hat askew on his head, he felt my fevered brow. He then gazed at the sample of my red urine that Mother had thoughtfully preserved in an old coffee jar. He said, I think I'll take this away with me, and I'll give you a ring tomorrow. With that, he threaded his way back to his car through the little maze of pathways from our prefab to the main road. By now I had a temperature that was threatening to pop the mercury through the top of the tube. I had a burning fever, yet couldn't stop shivering. Not a comfortable combination, trust me. Poor Mother was now lumbered with all my ghastly health stuff yet again. We spent a horrible night. She lay down beside me on my bed and cuddled me and calmed me. It was all she could do. Another calamity had befallen us. I was 18 years old. It wasn't long before I was back in the Bristol Royal Infirmary, this time on bud ward. After a rapid visit from the booming-voiced Professor Bruce Perry, it was speedily ascertained that my old pal, the Streptococcus bug, had done for me yet again. This time I had developed acute nephritis, sometimes known as Bright's disease. With this charming little fellow the kidneys swell, hence the blood in the urine, and unless proper treatment is rapidly prescribed, there is the distinct possibility of an early meeting with the Grim Reaper. So it wasn't long before they'd pumped me full of penicillin. Let's hear it for Sir Alexander Fleming, folks. Then there were numerous needles for blood tests, which I never exactly fell in love with, but now older and a little wiser had learned to tolerate. Included in the fun was another bout of deliberate aspirin poisoning, mercifully short this time, and a diet about as appetizing as the contents of a flooded ashtray. All this and the ubiquitous bed rest for the next couple of months. So there it was, sort of back to square one. Not that a couple of months in bud ward was completely devoid of interest, nor even a little naughty pleasure, it has to be said. Bud ward at Bristol Royal Infirmary is on the top floor of a 4-storey building. Like the 3 wards on the floors stacked identically beneath it, there was a glass-fronted balcony housing about 6 patient beds. Since the hospital itself was already built in elevated position, the view from the 4th floor balcony of Bud ward was splendid. Had it been a hotel and not a hospital, one would have had to pay a lot more for this penthouse suite. So if one absolutely had to be in hospital, it was quite a good position to find oneself. By virtue of I know not what, it was in one of these balcony beds with its panoramic views across central and southern Bristol, that was to be my home for the next 10 weeks. Can't grumble about that. There had been good views from the children's ward, Ward 20, where I had spent several months of my earlier childhood, but the view from Bud Ward was even better. On the horizon one could see out to Knowle, and then around to Dundry Church, looking one way, then across to the hills above Bath, looking another. In the middle distance were Templemead Station and the Feeder Canal and the industrial parts of Bristol. In the foreground was what is now Broadmead and the main city centre shopping zone. At the time of my occupancy, Broadmead was being recreated and rebuilt after its bashing by the Luftwaffe in the war. In fact, right below my eerie position, swarms of workmen were clearing what used to be called Magpie Park. Here, it was said, here it had been one of the main city's burial places during the Great Plagues of the 17th century and earlier. It was on this site that John Lewis's flagship department store of the whole burgeoning new shopping area was to be built. I believe an awful lot of human remains had to be shifted and reburied. Nice work for someone. Some 25 years later, I took my eldest daughter Jane, then aged about 12, to Lewis's to buy her first ever bra. So, I guess the area is famous historically for more than one reason. My fellow patients on that balcony were an interesting bunch. In the next bed to mine was an odd lad called Roland. He had a complaint similar to mine. Come to think of it, so did all the other inhabitants of that balcony. I guess it was a sort of kidney corner as far as the medics were concerned. Anyway, Roland was a slightly built young man of about 16. He had one of those permanently thin red sinusy noses at which he was constantly dabbing all day long with the same handkerchief he'd retained up his sleeve of his dressing gown. Hospitals, it seems, in those days, hadn't really discovered bugs and infections. Anyway, old Roland wasn't the sharpest scalpel in the operating theatre, and he thought it a great jape to do things like putting his thermometer into his tea just before having his temperature taken, or dropping a couple of grapes into his urine bottle to freak the nurses who had to empty it. The nursing gals were on to him, however, and came to treat him like a sort of ward pet. They humoured and patronised him, and treated him generally as the village idiots of old would have been treated. Just about right, really. There was an Irish cleaning lady called Hannah, who sloshed around the balcony every day with her mop and bucket, wearing a green apron and cap. Roland would try to wind her up too, and was slightly more successful with her than with the wised-up nurses. "You're Hannah? You missed a bit under me locker. What's wrong with thee?" teased our Bristolian half-wit. Such remarks would enrage Hannah. "Be Jesus, you daft little bugger. You'd be better off doing it yourself then." Wise old Hannah knew a thing or two about horse racing. "Would you like a tip, boys?" she'd say daily from behind her flailing mop. "Botany Bay, in the 3:30 at Kempton. That'll win you a few quid, lads. Now take me word for it." I always used to check Hannah's tips the next day. She had more winners than losers, without a doubt. As a matter of fact, all my life, subsequently, on the extremely rare occasions I've had a successful bet on anything, I've intoned to myself with an Irish twang Hannah's little homily, "I backed a winner, I backed a winner." Strange how some things follow you all the way through your life.